Murder at Moonrise Abbey, a Hercule Poirot mystery by the Welsh coast. The storm-lashed coast of Wales stands an old convent turned boarding school, Moonrise Abbey. Its ancient bells have not rung in years, yet one cold autumn night a single note echoes across the cliffs, followed by a scream. When Hercule Poirot arrives, summoned by a cryptic letter and an old nun's diary that foretells death, he finds more than murder. He finds prophecy, and among the shadows of faith and guilt the truth waits, beneath the moon. Chapter 1. The abbey on the cliff. The train had been delayed for nearly an hour by drifting mist along the Welsh coast, and when at last it shuddered into the station at Penmorfa, the evening light was already fading to a dull coppery grey. A damp wind came off the sea, and carried with it the mournful sound of the tide pulling at the shingle. Hercule Poirot stepped down from the carriage, adjusted his hat with a precise touch, and surveyed the desolate platform with that air of delicate disapproval which Hastings knew so well. "My friend," he announced, "and there is nothing melancholier than an English seaside town out of season." Captain Hastings laughed, drawing his coat closer. "It may cheer you up to know that we've only 20 minutes' drive to our inn. A week of quiet sea air and no mysteries whatsoever. That's what the doctor ordered, eh?" Poirot gave a small smile, but his grey-green eyes missed nothing. "Ah, Hastings, you tempt fate when you speak so." Their hired motor-car rattled along the coast road, a narrow strip of tarmac clinging to cliffs that dropped sheer into the darkening sea. The driver, a thin man with a cap pulled low, nodded toward the horizon. "Bit of a storm coming, sir. The fog's rising fast. Won't be long before you can't see the moon at all." Poirot murmured, "So there is a moon tonight?" "Oh, aye," said the driver. "A harvest moon, they call it, red as blood when it rises. Locals say that when the moon comes up crimson, the sea takes its due." Hastings chuckled. "A bit of Welsh superstition, I suppose." The driver didn't answer. He only crossed himself quickly, before turning the car up a winding lane lined with twisted yew trees. Through the mist appeared the first outline of their destination, Moonrise Abbey. It loomed suddenly from the cliff top, its dark stone turrets cutting a sharp silhouette against the fading light. What might once have been graceful architecture now appeared forbidding: high Gothic arches, narrow windows that glimmered faintly from within, and a bell tower long fallen into disuse. "A school now, isn't it?" Hastings asked, peering out. "Yes, sir," said the driver. "Boarding school for young ladies. Used to be a convent years back. Nuns left after the Great War. Some say they never really left, if you take my meaning." He gave a dry laugh that convinced neither listener. Poirot merely raised an eyebrow. They found the Moonrise Inn overbooked, as the driver had warned, and its harried proprietor offered an unexpected solution. "If you gentlemen don't mind unusual lodgings, the headmistress up at the Abbey lets rooms sometimes. Visitors, old girls, inspectors and such. She's a Miss Llewellyn, very respectable. Though the place gives some folk the creeps." Hastings agreed readily. Poirot, though he hesitated a moment, inclined his head. "Very well. If the lady will have us, we accept. I have, as you say, the curiosity." The abbey door was opened by a tall woman of severe bearing, her greying hair pinned neatly, her expression composed yet distant. "I am Miss Gwenda Llewellyn," she said. "You are the gentleman from the inn? Do come in, you must be chilled." The interior was vast and echoing, smelling faintly of wax polish and sea salt damp. Candlelight shimmered on old stone walls, where religious paintings had been replaced with notices about Latin exams and fire drills. The building had not quite decided whether it belonged to God or to education. Over tea in the old refectory, Miss Llewellyn explained that the girls were away on their mid-term break, leaving only a few staff. "It is quiet now," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Almost too quiet, one might say." Poirot inclined his head politely. "It is a place of great history, mademoiselle. One feels it the weight of the years." She seemed pleased. "Indeed. The abbey was founded in the 12th century, though most of what you see is later. We find relics now and then, manuscripts, carvings, small things. Only last month we discovered a diary hidden in a wall cavity behind the chapel organ. It belonged to one of the nuns who lived here, Sister Miriam. Something in her tone caught Poirot's attention. "A diary, you say? How romantic." Miss Llewellyn gave a faint laugh. "Hardly that. It is unsettling, to say the least. The passages are obscure, warnings, prophecies, nonsense perhaps. The staff are quite spooked by it. May one inquire what these prophecies concern?" She hesitated. "Death. She wrote that when the moon rose crimson over the sea, a soul would be taken, a punishment for sin within the abbey walls." Hastings laughed awkwardly. "Surely you don't take that seriously, Miss Llewellyn." "Of course not," she replied too quickly. "But the younger teachers do. One even swears she's heard footsteps in the cloisters at night, when no one else is about." Poirot studied her face. "And you, mademoiselle, have you heard them?" Her eyes flickered. "Once," she said softly. "Only once." Later, in their small adjoining rooms, Hastings attempted cheerfulness as he unpacked. "Haunted abbey or not, I'll wager we sleep well tonight. Sea air always does wonders for me." Poirot stood at the narrow window, gazing across the dark lawns to where the cliff dropped to the unseen beach below. A pale glow gathered along the horizon. "Shall you observe, Hastings," he said quietly, "that the moon is indeed red? Outside, the tide crashed harder against the rocks, and somewhere within the vast building, a single bell tolled once low metallic and uncertain. They slept uneasily. Morning came with mist thick as wool. Breakfast was served by a young woman named Miss Alice Price, a mathematics mistress with quick eyes and a habit of glancing over her shoulder as though expecting someone. She apologized for the simplicity of the meal, toast, tea, and eggs, and then lingered, as though reluctant to leave. "Did Miss Llewellyn tell you about the diary?" she asked suddenly. "She mentioned it," said Poirot. "You have seen it, perhaps?" Her hands tightened on the tray. "I have read it, or tried to. It's not just prophecies, Mr. Poirot, it's a confession. Someone killed a man here long ago, and I believe the diary was meant as a warning." Before Poirot could question further, Miss Llewellyn's voice echoed from the doorway. "That will be all, Miss Price?" The younger woman coloured, nodded, and departed quickly. Poirot turned to the headmistress with an expression of mild concern. "You permit your staff much imagination, I see." She smiled thinly. "Miss Price is overworked. She'll be leaving us soon. Perhaps the atmosphere here is too heavy for some." Poirot did not reply. His gaze fell on the mantelpiece, where a small framed photograph rested, an image of the abbey taken many years ago. In one corner, almost hidden in the shadow of the chapel door, a figure in a nun's habit could just be made out. "Curious," he murmured. Miss Llewellyn followed his gaze. "That photograph was taken before the war. The last of the sisters had gone by then, at least, that's what the records say." The day passed in slow routine. Poirot inspected the library, the chapel, the refectory. Everywhere dust lay thick and undisturbed, except for the faintest of recent footprints. The wind moaned through broken panes high in the bell tower, and distant gulls cried as if echoing lost voices. At dusk, Hastings suggested a walk along the cliff path. The mist had lifted, and the sea shone darkly below them. "Odd place for a school, don't you think?" he said. "Rather too gloomy for young girls." "Perhaps," Poirot replied, "it is chosen for isolation. There is peace here, but also concealment." As they turned back, the abbey's outline stood black against the rising moon. It was, as the driver had said, enormous, blood-red, hovering above the sea like a wound in the sky. When they entered the courtyard again, the great door was slightly ajar. From somewhere deep within came the faint sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing down the stone corridors. Hastings called out, but there was no answer. Poirot laid a finger to his lips. "Come, Hastings. Let us not disturb the ghosts. Tomorrow will be time enough for explanations." But that night neither man slept. Shortly after midnight, a single piercing scream rang through the abbey, cutting through the stillness like the stroke of a blade, and the crimson moon shone down upon the sea. Chapter 2. The Diary of Sister Miriam. When Captain Hastings burst into Poirot's room, candle in hand and dressing-gown askew, his face was white. "Did you hear it, Poirot? That scream, good Lord, it chilled me to the bone." Poirot was already awake, sitting neatly on the edge of the bed as if expecting such a disturbance. "Yes, my friend. It came from the east wing, the old chapel side. Just so. Poirot slipped on his robe and shoes, fastidiously straightened his collar, and reached for the small electric torch he always carried when traveling. "Let us investigate, Hastings." But calmly, always calmly. The corridors were dark, the air cold enough to mist their breath. The abbey stones seemed to absorb sound. Their footsteps echoed hollowly. Somewhere in the distance a door banged in the wind. They met Miss Llewellyn halfway along the hall, a candle shaking in her hand. Her normally composed face was ashen. "Thank heaven you heard," she whispered. "It came from Miss Price's room. I'm afraid something dreadful has happened." The door was ajar. Poirot entered first, the beam of his torch cutting a pale path through the gloom. The window stood open, curtains stirring in the salt wind. On the floor, half in shadow, lay Miss Alice Price. Her head rested awkwardly against the bottom stair of the small staircase leading to the chapel gallery. Her face was peaceful, too peaceful. The candle she had been holding had rolled away, its flame guttered out. Poirot knelt beside her. "The poor lady is quite dead," he said softly. Miss Llewellyn made a choked sound. "She must have fallen, slipped on the stair." "Oh, Mr. Poirot, how terrible!" Poirot's eyes travelled slowly across the scene. "Perhaps. But one must not jump to conclusions." He pointed to the polished wooden step, where a faint smear of wax marked the surface. "You see, Hastings, this wax has been spilled recently, yet the candle Miss Price held is intact. Curious, no?" He examined the victim's right hand. It was clenched around something small and smooth. He pried it gently open, revealing a bead, dark oval with a faint cross carved upon it. "A rosary bead," he murmured. "And one missing from the string she wore round her wrist." Miss Llewellyn turned away. "Please, must we—" "I can't bear it," Poirot rose. "Forgive me. The details, however small, are often the truest witnesses." He moved to the desk. There lay an open book, old leather-bound, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was faded, cramped, unmistakably feminine. "What is this?" Poirot asked. Miss Llewellyn swallowed. "The diary I mentioned last night. Sister Miriam's." Hastings frowned. "Why on earth would Miss Price have that in her room?" "I don't know," said the headmistress faintly. "She took an interest in it, too much, perhaps. I meant to remove it from circulation. The other staff found it disturbing." Poirot read aloud a passage near the top of the open page. "When the moon rises crimson, a soul will depart. The sea shall claim what was promised, and the debt of the living be paid in silence." He closed the book gently. "And last night the moon was indeed crimson." Miss Llewellyn's hands trembled. "You can't mean that you think this prophecy has anything to do with it? Surely you don't believe—" Poirot smiled sadly. "I believe only in human nature, mademoiselle. But superstition, when convenient, can serve as a very good disguise for crime." By morning, the local constable, a stout, red-faced man named Sergeant Morgan, had arrived. He examined the stairway, took down statements, and pronounced himself satisfied that Miss Price's death was a tragic fall. She was carrying a candle, lost her footing. "Nothing more to it," he said, closing his notebook with a snap. "No need to go stirring up nonsense about ghosts and prophecies, eh?" Poirot inclined his head politely, but said nothing. When the sergeant had gone, he turned to Hastings. "My friend, there are certain facts which do not march." Hastings sighed. "Such as?" "The wax on the stair was fresh, yet the candle was still whole. There was no mark upon the floor where she fell. And, most telling, the position of the body." "Position?" Poirot gestured delicately. "If she had slipped from the stair, she would have struck her head upon the second or third step. But she lies with her feet pointing toward the stair, not away from it. That is to say, she was already on the floor when the fall occurred." Hastings blinked. "Good Lord, you think she was placed there?" "Precisely." He paused, studying the diary again. "And yet, why choose such a theatrical setting? Why the open window, the red moon, the diary? It is an arrangement, a tableau, meaning—" "Meaning," Poirot said softly, "that our murderer is both intelligent and superstitious, or wishes us to believe so." That afternoon, Poirot sought out Miss Llewellyn in her office. She sat rigidly behind her desk, her black dress stark against the pale walls. The diary lay closed before her, as though she had been studying it. "You must forgive my intrusion," Poirot began. But there are questions only you can answer. She met his gaze with weary eyes. I suppose you mean to play detective, Mr. Poirot. Very well, ask. First, this diary, how did you come to find it? During renovations last month. The builders discovered it behind a loose stone near the chapel organ. It must have been hidden there since the nuns' time. And Sister Miriam, what do we know of her? Little enough. She entered the order in 1899, died in 1916. There is a record of her grave in the churchyard, though I confess I've never looked for it. Poirot tapped the cover lightly. The passages. Some speak of punishment, sin, and death. You did not think them unusually personal. Her face tightened. Every convent has its scandals, Mr. Poirot. The past should remain buried. I only wish Miss Price had understood that. She took an interest in history. She was determined to uncover it, Miss Llewellyn said bitterly. She fancied herself an investigator, always asking questions about the Abbey's time as a hospital during the war, about the nuns who left. I told her to leave it be. Did she mention finding anything, letters, photographs? The headmistress hesitated, then shook her head. Not to me. Poirot inclined his head. Merci. One last thing. Last night, at what hour did you retire? Shortly after 10. I heard the clock strike midnight, but did not leave my room until the scream woke me. Poirot thanked her and withdrew, though he did not believe a word of that last statement. Hastings found him later in the library, examining a small rosary taken from Miss Price's belongings. One bead was missing, so what's next? Hastings asked. Poirot smiled faintly. We must reconstruct as always. The diary was upon her desk, the rosary bead in her hand. She had been reading or perhaps copying a passage when someone entered. There was a struggle, brief but decisive. The murderer placed her body to suggest a fall, then opened the window to let the wind do the rest. Très simple. Then the question is who? Just so. And to that end, we must know who else had reason to fear the revelations of this diary. He turned the pages with gloved fingers, stopping at an earlier entry dated March 14th, 1916. He comes again, the man in the uniform. He begs forgiveness, but I cannot give it. The sin cannot be unmade. The sea shall take him when the moon turns red. Poirot's brows lifted. A man in uniform, Hastings. During wartime, what more natural than a soldier? Perhaps a patient if the Abbey was a hospital. Exactly. And what happens to soldiers who sin and are not forgiven? Poirot's tone was grave. Sometimes they die and their ghosts walk. Hastings shivered. So you don't really think... Poirot chuckled softly. Mon ami, I leave ghosts to the poets. What interests me is guilt. Someone alive still fears the consequences of a deed committed long ago. The diary is not merely a relic. It is a weapon. That evening the storm broke. Rain hammered against the windows, and the sea thundered below the cliffs. Poirot stood once more at his narrow window, the diary in his hand. Strange, is it not, he said. The ink grows fainter toward the end, the hand unsteady, as though written by a dying woman. Yet there are entries later in a stronger hand, more modern, and signed the same, Sister Miriam. Hastings frowned. You mean someone forged them? I mean, Hastings, that either Sister Miriam lived longer than history records, or someone wished us to think she did. He closed the diary. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we shall visit the chapel. It is there, I think, that both the living and the dead have left their secrets. Outside, lightning lit the Abbey's tower in a stark, ghostly flash. The thunder that followed seemed to shake the very stones. Chapter 3. Death on the stair morning came bleak and colourless. A wet mist clung to the grounds, creeping through the broken arches of the cloister and wrapping the Abbey in a dim, ghostly veil. The gulls circled restlessly above the cliffs, their cries thin and mournful. Poirot descended to breakfast precisely at 8, as though nothing whatsoever had occurred the night before. The other guests, mostly teachers and 2 timid pupils sent home too late for the storm, sat in uneasy silence. A Miss Llewellyn presided at the head of the table, pale but determined. You are very punctual, Mr. Poirot, she said stiffly. I am always punctual, mademoiselle. Order and symmetry. Without them, even tragedy loses its meaning. He buttered a slice of toast delicately. Tell me, who among your staff was most close to Miss Price? Miss Llewellyn hesitated. Perhaps Miss Rowe, our music teacher. They often walk together by the sea. Poirot nodded. And where is she this morning? She took the early train to Aberystwyth. She had family matters to attend to. Indeed. Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. That is unfortunate timing. She was most distressed by the death. I saw no reason to detain her. Poirot smiled faintly. Of course not. Hastings, watching, knew that tone too well. Poirot never argued directly when he already doubted someone's judgment. An hour later, Poirot stood once more at the foot of the small chapel stair, the place where Miss Price had met her end. The constable had finished his work, and the body was gone, leaving only the faint wax smear and a darker stain upon the floorboards. The wind outside still moaned through the broken bell tower, carrying with it the salt tang of the sea. Hastings shivered. There's something damned queer about this place, Poirot. I can't put my finger on it. Poirot knelt gracefully, examining the base of the stair with a magnifying glass. It is the sense of disorder that disturbs you, mon ami. Death has no right to enter where life is meant to teach and pray. Yet, he pointed, observe, these marks on the floor near the lowest step. They are not from a fall. They are scuff marks made by a man's shoe, I think. Hastings crouched beside him. A man, you're sure? Poirot nodded. See the pattern. Heavier at the heel, smaller than average, but deep. Someone stood here, moved quickly, and dragged something heavy, perhaps the body itself. He rose, brushing imaginary dust from his knees. Now look at the candle wax. One drop only at the edge of the stair. If Miss Price had slipped while carrying the candle, wax would be scattered. But no, it was placed here deliberately. Hastings frowned. But why? Because our murderer, Hastings, has a flair for the dramatic. He or she wished the death to appear linked to the diary's prophecy. The wax, the open window, the red moon, it is all theatre. Poirot turned toward the chapel door. Come, let us see the stage itself. The chapel was small, built of cold grey stone, its pews polished smooth by years of hands now long gone. Light filtered dimly through stained glass, casting watery patches of colour on the flagstones. At the far end stood the altar, plain, unadorned, save for a single brass crucifix. To the right, a wooden gallery overlooked the nave. It was from this gallery, Hastings realized, that the narrow stair rose to Miss Price's room. Poirot moved slowly through the space, his eyes darting from wall to wall. Do you feel it, Hastings? The age, the silence. Such places remember even when men forget. He paused before a small door at the rear, half concealed by a curtain. It opened with a reluctant creak onto a narrow vestry, lined with cupboards and old vestments. The smell of mildew and dust was strong, and there in the corner, half hidden beneath a cloth, stood a broken organ. Poirot lifted the cover. Ah, Miss Llewellyn said the diary was found behind a stone near the organ, did she not? He examined the wall behind it, rough, irregular. One stone, darker than the rest, bore faint scratches along its edge. Poirot's fingertips traced them gently. This was removed recently, Hastings. The dust is disturbed. He pressed against the stone. It shifted slightly inward. Behind it yawned a shallow recess. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Good heavens, breathed Hastings. Poirot unwrapped it carefully. Within lay a set of yellowed papers, a rusted locket and a photograph, faded but clear enough to make out the figure of a young nun standing beside a man in uniform. Poirot studied it silently for a long moment. You see, Hastings, the man in the diary, the soldier. He was real. The locket contained a single strand of dark hair and a slip of paper, inscribed in careful script. Forgive me, Miriam. The war is cruel, but not so cruel as my heart. There was no signature. Poirot's eyes narrowed. This, I think, was the true secret Miss Price uncovered. You believe she found these papers? Without doubt. She must have come upon the loose stone while exploring. She read the diary, connected the name Miriam, and sought to match it to the photograph. And someone who knew the story, could not allow that. They returned to the main hall where Miss Llewellyn awaited them. She was pale and her composure showed fine cracks. Mr. Poirot, must this continue? The police were satisfied. Poirot inclined his head. The police are most efficient, mademoiselle. Yet I am troubled by small details. Always the small details. They ruin the picture if left uncorrected. She pressed her lips together. I cannot see what good can come of disturbing the past. The past, alas, has already disturbed the present, Poirot said gently. Tell me, who occupied this building during the Great War? Her eyes flickered. It was a convalescent hospital. Officers, mostly. The order lent the Abbey for that purpose. And Sister Miriam. She tended the wounded, I believe. Miss Llewellyn hesitated, then added reluctantly, was dismissed before the war ended. Dismissed. For what reason? There were rumors. She drew a sharp breath. A friendship with one of the officers. Improper, perhaps. She was sent away to a convent in the north. Nothing more is known. Poirot's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. And the officer's name? I have no idea, she said quickly. Records were destroyed when the hospital closed. Destroyed or removed. Miss Llewellyn rose abruptly. I will not be cross-examined in my own school, Mr. Poirot. I have tolerated this out of respect for Miss Price, but I cannot allow you to turn this into a scandal. Poirot bowed slightly. 1,000 apologies. You are quite right, of course. It is not scandal we seek, only truth. She swept from the room. Hastings exhaled. Well, that was pleasant. Poirot smiled thinly. Our headmistress knows more than she says. When one defends the past so fiercely, Hastings, it is usually because the past is still alive. That night the rain ceased, and the Abbey lay silent except for the soft boom of the waves below. Poirot could not sleep. He rose, lit his candle, and opened the diary once more. Near the end, one entry caught his eye. The date was March 28, 1916, 2 weeks after the earlier passage. He leaves tomorrow. They will never forgive me nor him. I have hidden what must be hidden. If any soul should find it, let them judge kindly. For the moon will rise again, and another debt will be paid. Poirot sat motionless for a long time. Then softly he murmured, The moon will rise again, yes. And it has, once for Sister Miriam and once for Miss Price. He closed the book, his expression grave. Hastings, he said quietly, I think there will be another death if we do not act quickly. At dawn, Poirot and Hastings walked to the graveyard behind the Abbey. The sea mist had lifted slightly, revealing the crooked line of headstones stretching toward the cliffs. Poirot stopped before one half buried under ivy. The inscription was barely legible. Sister Miriam Gray, 1887-1916. Her soul at peace. Poirot brushed away moss from the lower edge, and froze. Hastings. Regarde, observe. The earth before the grave had been disturbed. Not long ago. Someone has been here, he said softly. Recently. Perhaps even last night, Hastings stared. But why? What would anyone want from a nun's grave? Poirot looked out toward the grey horizon where the sea met the sky. To hide something, perhaps, or to remove it before I could find it. He straightened, his face calm but his eyes cold. Come, Hastings. We return to the Abbey. The game is moving swiftly now. Our murderer has begun to act again, and behind them, unseen in the drifting mist, a figure watched, motionless among the graves. Chapter 4. The Nun's Secret. The sea mist had thickened again by the time Poirot and Hastings returned to the Abbey. It drifted low across the courtyard, muffling sound and softening the edges of stone and shadow, until everything seemed half real, as if the Abbey itself were holding its breath. Inside, the air was close, heavy with the scent of wax and age. The bell in the tower struck 9 dull notes, echoing through the cloisters. Poirot walked slowly along the corridor, his cane tapping lightly against the flagstones. He seemed to Hastings unusually grave. You're thinking about that disturbed grave, aren't you? Hastings asked quietly. Poirot nodded. Yes, mon ami. Graves are curious things. They are meant to keep secrets, but someone has tried to make that grave speak again. They stopped outside Miss Llewellyn's study. The door stood half open, and voices drifted from within. Don't you see, we can't have this continue. Miss Llewellyn's voice low but tense. If he keeps asking questions, the board will hear of it. Our reputation will be ruined. A second voice, softer, anxious. Poirot recognized it instantly. Miss Rowe, the music teacher who was supposed to have left the previous morning. "I didn't mean any harm," Miss Rowe was saying. "But when I found the photograph, oh God, I should have destroyed it." "Hush." Miss Llewellyn's tone cut like a knife. "Do you want him to hear? Go back to your room and say nothing. I'll deal with Mr. Poirot myself." Poirot raised an eyebrow at Hastings, then rapped gently upon the door. "May we enter, mademoiselle?" There was a brief silence. Then Miss Llewellyn's composed voice, "Mr. Poirot, how very punctual of you." They entered. Miss Llewellyn stood by her desk, the colour drained from her face, but her chin held high. Miss Rowe, pale and shaking, avoided their gaze. Poirot's eyes flicked briefly to the table, where the same old diary lay open beside a cup of untouched tea. "Ah," Poirot said mildly. "You have been reading again of Sister Miriam?" Miss Llewellyn's hand moved to close the book. "Merely reviewing what you showed me yesterday. It seems to fascinate everyone." Poirot smiled faintly. "Indeed, perhaps because it speaks of a certain sin that is yet unpaid." Miss Rowe made a faint strangled sound. Poirot turned toward her gently. "Mademoiselle, you were not upon the train to Aberystwyth, I think." "No," she whispered. I couldn't bring myself to leave." "The storm?" Poirot regarded her kindly. "Or perhaps it was guilt, not weather, that detained you." Miss Llewellyn's eyes flashed. "You will not bully my staff, Mr. Poirot." Poirot lifted a hand. "No bullying, I assure you. I merely seek to understand what connects the death of Miss Price to a nun long dead." He moved closer to the window, where the light fell grey and cold. "You see, Mademoiselle Rowe, Miss Price discovered the hidden papers, did she not?" She nodded miserably. "Yes, she showed them to me 2 nights before she died. She was excited, said it would make a wonderful article for one of the historical journals. She wanted to prove that Sister Miriam had been wrongly accused. And she told you about the soldier. She believed he was buried near the cliffs, that he'd drowned or fallen, and that Sister Miriam had tried to hide the truth. I told her to stop digging into it. Miss Llewellyn said, 'Enough!' Miss Llewellyn snapped. 'This gossip is indecent.'" Poirot turned to her. "Forgive me, but indecency, like truth, does not die simply because one forbids it. Tell me, mademoiselle, why do you fear this story so much?" "I fear nothing," she said coldly. "Aye," said Poirot softly. "Then why were you seen last night in the graveyard digging?" The silence was total. Even Hastings caught his breath. Miss Llewellyn's eyes widened, then narrowed. "That is absurd." "Absurd, perhaps," Poirot said. "Yet the ground was disturbed, freshly. The footprints were small, the shoes narrow, hardly those of a man. And you, mademoiselle, own such a pair. You even carried a lantern, did you not? A broken one, the same that hangs now by the vestry door." Her mouth tightened, and for a moment her control faltered. Poirot saw the tremor in her fingers. "You cannot prove that," she whispered. "No," Poirot admitted. "Not yet, but I can suggest why you were there. You feared the diary would lead me, or others, to something buried with Sister Miriam, something which could destroy the name of Moonrise Abbey forever." He leaned closer. "Tell me, Miss Llewellyn, whose name was engraved inside the locket hidden with those papers?" She stared at him, silent. Poirot straightened. "I will tell you. It was not that of Sister Miriam, nor of the soldier. It was yours." A faint gasp escaped Miss Rowe. "Impossible!" she cried. "Miss Llewellyn, what does he mean?" Poirot's voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "She means, Miss Rowe, that our head mistress is no other than Miriam Gray herself." For a moment no one spoke. The wind pressed against the window like a restless spirit. Then Miss Llewellyn, Miriam, laughed softly, bitterly. "Very clever, Mr. Poirot. Yes, I was Sister Miriam Gray. I changed my name after the war. I built this school from what remained of the Abbey. I thought the past was buried with the dead." She sank into her chair, her composure gone. "He was a young officer, Captain Henry Llewellyn. They sent him here wounded. We were both fools. When the Mother Superior discovered us, she had him transferred and me expelled. A month later, he drowned trying to reach me by boat from the mainland. I never saw him again." Her voice trembled. "They said it was a punishment from God. I believed them. I buried his letters behind the organ, swore never to speak his name. I took his instead. It was the only part of him I could keep." Poirot's gaze was gentle but unyielding. "And Miss Price discovered the truth." "Yes." Miriam's eyes filled with tears. She meant no harm, but she threatened to tell the story publicly, said it would redeem Sister Miriam's name. I begged her not to, but she would not listen. So you killed her, Poirot said quietly. Miriam looked up sharply. No, I swear it. I found her after she fell. I thought it was as if the curse had come true. I panicked. I arranged the scene to make it look accidental. But I did not push her. Poirot studied her face closely. Then who did? Miriam hesitated, then turned toward Miss Rowe. You were with her that night, weren't you? Miss Rowe shook her head wildly. No! I went to her room, yes, but only to warn her. I left her alive. I swear it. Poirot raised a hand for silence. Enough. Accusations will not serve us now. The truth, it seems, hides behind too many curtains. He began to pace slowly. Let us reason, Hastings. 2 women bound by secrets, one dies, the other lies. But the hand that killed Miss Price is neither of theirs. Hastings frowned. Then who? Poirot turned toward the window, where the sea mist rolled thick and heavy. Someone who feared Miss Price's discovery for another reason entirely. Someone who had access to the diary and to Sister Miriam's story before either woman found it. Someone who has walked these halls longer than any of them. Miriam's breath caught. You can't mean— Yes, said Poirot softly. The caretaker, Mr. Davies. That evening Poirot asked that Mr. Davies join them in the drawing-room. The man came reluctantly, wiping his hands on a rag. His lined face was expressionless. You wish to see me, sir? Poirot gestured to a chair. A small matter, monsieur. You have served this abbey many years, have you not? Since before it was a school, Davies said gruffly. I helped convert the buildings after the war. And before that? The man hesitated. I was the groundsman during the hospital days. Stayed on when the sisters left. Poirot nodded slowly. Then you would have known the officers who were sent here to recover. Perhaps even Captain Henry Llewellyn. Davies' face hardened. I remember him. Poirot's tone grew soft. You were brothers in arms, were you not? He was your commanding officer. The man said nothing. Poirot leaned forward. You blame Sister Miriam for his death. You believed she deceived him, led him to his end. And when you learned that Miss Price meant to publish the story, you saw your chance to avenge your captain. Davies's hand twitched. You've no proof of that. I have more than you think. Your boots, monsieur, they match the marks upon the chapel floor, and the wax on the stair came from the candle you carried. You used the prophecy from the diary to mask your crime, to make it appear the abbey itself demanded payment. Davies stood abruptly, his face white with fury. She deserved it. Both of them did. The nun ruined him, made him betray his vows, his name, his country. I watched him drown from the cliffs that night. The sea took him, but she lived on, building her school over his grave. Poirot's voice was quiet. And so you killed another innocent woman in his name. Davies's shoulders sagged. Maybe. Maybe there's no innocence left in a place like this. He turned toward the door. But the local constable, summoned quietly by Poirot earlier, was already waiting there. Davies did not resist. When the door closed behind the constable, silence fell once more. Poirot turned to Miriam. She was weeping silently, her face hidden in her hands. Justice has been done, madame, he said gently, but I fear it will not bring you peace. She looked up, her eyes hollow. Peace, perhaps that is for others. For me, only memory. Poirot inclined his head. Memory can wound, but it can also forgive. The past may be buried now, properly this time. He turned to Hastings. Come, mon ami. Our work here is finished. As they stepped out into the night, the mist began to lift and the first light of dawn touched the sea beyond the cliffs. The abbey stood silent behind them, its windows gleaming faintly like watchful eyes. The case of the Moonrise Abbey, Hastings murmured. I'll not forget this one. Poirot smiled faintly. Nor should you, Hastings. For it reminds us, truth may sleep long beneath the stone, but it never truly dies. Chapter 5, The Last Confession. The sea that morning was calmer, but the air carried a strange heaviness, as though the cliffs themselves were holding their breath. The mist had thinned, revealing long streaks of pale light on the horizon, yet the abbey's stone walls still glistened with last night's rain, dark and ancient. Poirot stood on the terrace overlooking the sea, his small figure motionless against the widening dawn. Behind him Hastings approached, boots crunching softly over the gravel. "It's over, then," Hastings said quietly. "The police have Davies in custody. He's already confessed." "I must say, Poirot, you've outdone yourself again." Poirot did not move for a long moment. Then he said very softly, "No, mon ami, it is not over." Hastings frowned. "What do you mean?" "He admitted to killing Miss Price." "Yes," said Poirot, turning to face him. "He admitted to striking her. But not all confessions are the truth, Hastings. Some are shields. Some acts of atonement." Hastings blinked. "You think he lied?" Poirot's eyes were on the sea. "Not lied, perhaps only believed what he said." "There is a difference," he turned away abruptly. "Come, we shall speak again with Miss Llewellyn. There are details that still trouble the little grey cells." Miss Llewellyn received them in her private sitting-room. The fire burned low, throwing restless light upon the walls. She looked older than before, her shoulders bowed, her face pale and drawn. "I suppose you have come to tell me it is finished," she said wearily. Poirot regarded her for a long moment. "I wish I could, madame, but there is a small matter which does not align. Always, you see, I must have symmetry. And here it is lacking." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Symmetry? There is nothing symmetrical about sin, Mr. Poirot." "Perhaps not. Yet truth, madame, it has its own balance. You said you found Miss Price after she fell. You arranged the scene, believing her death the fulfillment of some dreadful prophecy." "Yes," she said quietly. "I told you that." "And yet, if that were true, why was the diary open to a page you had not written? A page describing a prophecy that mentioned not one death but two." Miss Llewellyn's head lifted sharply. "Two?" Poirot crossed to the desk and opened the diary, which he had kept since the investigation began. The faded handwriting seemed to shimmer in the lamplight. "When the crimson moon has risen twice, and the sea takes what the earth denied, the debt shall be paid in full." "Twice," Poirot repeated softly. "And last night the sea took another, Captain Henry Llewellyn's murderer." Her voice trembled. "You mean Davies?" "Oui. But that passage, madame, it was written not by the hand of a nun dying in repentance, but by another hand altogether." "A firmer one, yours." She froze. "What are you implying?" "That you, madame, wrote those final entries," Poirot said gently, "to make it appear that Sister Miriam had foreseen her own punishment, to make the diary seem a relic of prophecy, rather than a document of guilt. In short, you forged them." Her eyes blazed suddenly. "You dare—" "Calmly, madame. You see, the ink of those entries is not faded. It is modern, perhaps 10-15 years old. You used the diary to frighten Miss Price, to make her abandon her research. But she did not. You arranged a meeting with her in the chapel that night, intending to persuade her once more to remain silent." The conversation grew heated. "There was a struggle. I did not—" Poirot held up a hand. "No, you did not intend to kill her. But she fell. And when you realized what had happened, you used the superstition, the diary, the moon to disguise your crime. You set the stage just as Davies believed he had. He merely stumbled upon your deception, saw what he wished to see and confessed to it out of guilt and old hatred." The silence stretched long and heavy. Hastings shifted uneasily. At last Miss Llewellyn whispered, "How could you possibly know that?" Poirot's voice softened. "Because, madame, Davies' boots did not match the prints near the stair. His soles were patched with iron tacks. The marks on the floor were smooth. They belonged to a woman of your height. Your weight." Her composure shattered. She covered her face with her hands. "You don't understand. She would have ruined everything. The school, my life, his memory." Poirot's tone remained gentle. "And so you sought to protect both your love and your pride. You meant only to silence her, not to destroy her. But even the smallest push on a polished stair—" She lowered her hands, eyes shining with tears. "She slipped. I swear she slipped. When I saw her lying there, I thought God himself had punished me again." Poirot bowed his head slightly. "Perhaps he had punished both of you, madame." After a long silence, she said quietly, "What will you do now?" "I will tell the truth," said Poirot simply. "Always that. But perhaps—" With compassion her voice trembled. "Then may God have mercy on me. Poirot inclined his head gravely. "He already has, madame. He has given you time to confess." That evening, as the police carriage took Miss Llewellyn away, Poirot stood once more upon the Abbey steps. The last of the sun was sinking into the western sea, turning the windows to blood and gold. Hastings came to stand beside him. "So it was her all along." "Yes," Poirot said softly. "A woman who sinned once out of love and again out of fear. Her first secret destroyed a life. Her second destroyed her soul." They watched as the carriage disappeared down the long twisting road toward the village. "She was remarkable," Poirot said after a moment. "So controlled, so precise. But the heart, Hastings, it will betray even the most orderly mind," Hastings sighed. "And the diary?" Poirot looked down at the worn volume in his hands. "A strange thing, is it not? A book that began as a nun's confession became a murderer's disguise. Perhaps now it can rest." He opened it one last time, tore out the forged pages carefully, and cast them into the fire burning in the hall. The old paper curled and blackened, the ink vanishing in smoke. "The rest shall remain," Poirot murmured. "For history, not for punishment." They stood in silence until the flames died down. The Abbey seemed to exhale, a long, slow breath of release. Chapter 6. The shadows beneath the sea. The morning after Miss Llewellyn's arrest dawned cold and bright. The rain had washed the sky clean, and the cliffs below Moonrise Abbey gleamed slick and black, as though the sea had polished them in its sleep. Gulls wheeled and cried above the surf, their voices sharp and echoing in the still air. Poirot stood by the old stone wall that divided the Abbey grounds from the cliff path. His hat was pulled low, his gloved hands resting on the top of his cane. To Hastings, who approached with a brisk step and a somewhat forced cheerfulness, he looked smaller than usual, as though the great detective had been slightly diminished by the weight of all he had seen. "Everything packed, Poirot," Hastings announced. "The car will take us to the station in half an hour. I'll be rather glad to be out of this place, to tell you the truth. There's something about it, well, it gets under one's skin." Poirot smiled faintly. "It is beautiful, Hastings, but also tragic. Such places remember even when men forget." Hastings looked toward the sea uneasily. "Still, I can't help thinking about Miss Llewellyn. Do you think she'll, well, you know, be sentenced?" Poirot's eyes remained on the horizon. "That, mon ami, is for the law to decide. She confessed freely. The court will take that into account, and yet—" He paused, his expression clouding. "Something about her confession troubles me." Hastings frowned. "But she admitted to pushing Miss Price, didn't she?" "Yes. And she explained the motive, the diary, the fear of exposure. All of it fits neatly. Too neatly, perhaps." Poirot turned, eyes glittering. "You recall the line from the diary, Hastings. The sea takes what the earth denied." "What do you make of that?" Hastings shrugged. "A bit of nonsense, surely, some old superstition." Poirot shook his head. "Non, mon ami. The nun who first wrote it, Sister Miriam, she meant something quite literal. I believe there was a body, a man's body, taken by the sea long ago. Captain Henry Llewellyn, her brother," Hastings said slowly. "You think he didn't die in the war?" Poirot's smile was grave. "Let us say, I think he did not die where he was supposed to." Later that morning, Poirot made his way to the western crypt, a low vaulted chamber that had once been the Abbey's burial vault. The school's caretaker, an old Welshman named Evan Price, unlocked the heavy door for him. The smell of damp stone and salt air rolled out, mingled with the faint scent of wax and mildew. "Not many come down here now, sir," said Price, his voice echoing. "The place gives the girls nightmares. They say the old sisters walk the passages at night." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, the ghosts." "Always the ghosts, monsieur. But perhaps they are only memories in need of peace." He stepped inside, his footsteps soft on the flagstones. Shafts of pale light filtered through the narrow slits of windows high above, striping the floor in dusty gold. Against the far wall, an ancient carving caught his eye, a relief of an angel holding a book, its wings half eroded by centuries of sea air. "Tell me, Monsieur Price," Poirot said, "these lower vaults, do they ever flood?" The caretaker nodded. "At high tide sometimes. The sea comes up through the cracks. That's why we keep the lower door bolted." Poirot knelt near the back wall, running a gloved finger along the stone floor. There, almost invisible, was a narrow seam, newer than the surrounding flagstones. "Someone has replaced this section," he murmured. Price leaned over, frowning. "Aye, about 10 years ago, when the new heating pipes were fitted. But I remember it, the builders found bones there." "Human bones?" "Indeed," Poirot said softly. "Yes, sir. The coroner said they were old, very old, maybe from the days when this was still a convent." Poirot's expression was unreadable. "And where are they now?" Price scratched his head. "Reburied in the churchyard, I believe. Miss Llewellyn saw to it herself." Poirot nodded. "Merci, monsieur, that is all I needed." Outside, the sky had grown overcast again, the wind sharp with the scent of rain. Hastings was waiting near the car, looking puzzled when Poirot rejoined him. "Good heavens, Poirot, you've got dust all over your knees. What on earth were you doing down there?" "Unearthly matters, Hastings," Poirot said with a small smile. "I have confirmed what I suspected. The true tragedy of Moonrise Abbey did not begin with Miss Price's death. It began 20 years earlier." "You mean Captain Llewellyn's disappearance?" "Precisely. He did not die in France, as reported. He came here perhaps to hide, perhaps to meet someone, a woman, Sister Miriam perhaps, or Miss Llewellyn herself. He died here accidentally, I think, and was buried in the crypt to conceal the scandal." Hastings stared. "Good Lord. Then Miss Llewellyn knew all along?" Poirot's expression softened. "She carried that guilt for decades. The school, the discipline, the piety, all of it, Hastings, was her penance. When Miss Price uncovered the truth, Miss Llewellyn's mind could not bear another ruin. She killed to protect what remained of her brother's memory." He sighed, eyes drifting to the sea. "She believed she had buried the past. But the sea, Hastings, the sea never forgets." As they drove away from the abbey, the cliffs rose behind them, stark against the grey horizon. Hastings glanced back once more, watching the high windows disappear into the mist. "It's strange," he said. "Even now it feels as if there's something watching." Poirot smiled gently. "Perhaps the spirits of the good sisters, content at last. Or perhaps only your imagination, mon ami." Hastings gave a small laugh. "Perhaps, but I'll be glad to sleep somewhere with fewer ghosts." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, but ghosts, Hastings, are not confined to old abbeys. They live also in the hearts of men and women, in regret, in love, in silence." He settled back in his seat, eyes closing briefly. Miss Llewellyn was both murderer and victim, and perhaps, somewhere beyond, she will find the forgiveness that eluded her in life. Hastings looked out toward the distant shimmer of the sea. "And what of the diary, Poirot?" Poirot opened his eyes. "It shall remain where it belongs, in the hands of the authorities. But I kept one page, Hastings, the very first." He drew a small folded sheet from his pocket. The faded ink read, "Forgive. Us, O Lord, our trespasses, for they rise with the tide, and the sea remembers all things." Hastings was silent for a long while. Then he said softly, "That's rather beautiful." Poirot smiled faintly. "Yes, mon ami. Even in guilt there is poetry." They rode on in silence as the road curved inland. Behind them, Moonrise Abbey stood solitary against the cliffs, the waves crashing endlessly below, not in anger, but in remembrance. The sun broke briefly through the clouds, lighting the abbey's tower in gold. For a moment it looked almost holy again. Poirot watched it fade into the mist, murmuring to himself, "The past is never dead, Hastings. It merely sleeps until someone dares to wake it." Chapter 7. The Letter from Cardiff. The train rolled steadily through the Welsh countryside, its rhythm soft and monotonous, the whistle rising now and again like a lament over the green hills. Poirot sat opposite Hastings in the first-class compartment, a cup of tea steaming gently in front of him. He appeared perfectly content, neat as ever, shoes gleaming, moustaches immaculately symmetrical. But Hastings, who had known him long enough to recognize the signs, saw that his friend's tranquility was only surface deep. "You're still thinking about the Abbey," Hastings said finally. Poirot looked up from his teacup, eyes twinkling faintly. "Mais oui, mon ami. One does not easily forget such a place. It had the melancholy of an organ playing in an empty church full of echoes." Hastings smiled faintly. "Well, I suppose so. Still, you solved it," Miss Llewellyn confessed. "The truth about her brother was uncovered. It's all tidy now, isn't it?" Poirot sighed. "Tidy, perhaps, but not complete." "Not complete," Hastings repeated, puzzled. "Good heavens. Poirot, what else is there?" Poirot looked out the window, where the last glimpse of the sea flashed between the rolling fields. "The sea, Hastings, it hides much, but it also gives back what men wish to forget. I feel as though it has not yet given back everything." Before Hastings could reply, the door to their compartment slid open. A porter entered, cap in hand, holding a brown envelope. "Telegram for you, sir," he said. Poirot took it, thanked him, and slit the seal with his usual precision. His eyes scanned the message, and for a moment his face grew utterly still. Then he folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his pocket. "What is it?" Hastings asked. "Bad news?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "Perhaps. It is from Inspector Vaughan, the officer who took Miss Llewellyn into custody. He asks that I call upon him in Cardiff before we return to London. There has been a development." Hastings raised his eyebrows. "A development? After she confessed?" Poirot merely murmured, "Just so," and gazed again at the passing countryside. They arrived in Cardiff in the late afternoon, the air thick with coal smoke and the bustle of the port. At the police station, Inspector Vaughan greeted them gravely. "I'm afraid it's an odd business, Mr. Poirot," he said, leading them into his office. "We've had the body of Miss Llewellyn examined more thoroughly before transfer to the county jail." "Her body?" Hastings exclaimed. "Good heavens, you don't mean—" Vaughan nodded. "She's dead. Hanged herself in her cell last night." Hastings went pale. "Dear Lord." Poirot sat very still. "Ah," he said softly, "the final act of a woman who lived by discipline and died by conscience." Vaughan hesitated. "There's more, I'm afraid." "We found this among her effects. It's addressed to you." He handed Poirot a sealed letter. The handwriting was delicate, precise, unmistakably feminine. Poirot turned it over once in his hand, then broke the seal. The letter inside was written in a clear, steady hand. He read aloud, voice low and deliberate. "Monsieur Poirot, when you read this, I shall be gone. I thank you for giving me the courage to speak the truth, though it was not, as you will soon see, the whole truth. You were right about my brother. He died at the Abbey, but not by accident. I killed him. It was I who struck him in anger, when he tried to leave with Sister Miriam. I loved him too much to see him bring shame upon our family. When I realized what I had done, she helped me hide his body beneath the crypt. The sea took it later when the storms came, and I believed the sin washed away. But the sea remembers, Monsieur Poirot, always." Miss Price discovered an old letter of his among the archives. She knew what I had done, and she pitied me. I thought she meant to expose me, but she only wanted to help. I misunderstood her mercy for threat. I struck her too. Do not think me cruel, only weak. I am tired of atonement. The Abbey will have its final peace now, and I too shall rest, your servant Gwenda Llewellyn." Poirot finished reading, folded the paper neatly, and sat back. For a long while none of the three men spoke. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence like a heartbeat. At last Hastings said quietly, "So it's all true, then?" "She killed them both." Poirot's voice was soft. "Yes, the confession she gave before the police was partial. But in this letter at last she has told everything. It is a sad and terrible completeness." Inspector Vaughan nodded. "I suppose it's best that it's over. I'll see that the letter is added to the official record." Poirot rose. "No, Inspector. This letter, it was addressed to me. It contains not a legal truth, but a human one. Let it remain private." Vaughan hesitated, then bowed his head. "As you wish, sir." Outside the evening was deepening. the lamps flaring yellow through the coal fog. Poirot and Hastings walked slowly along the quay, the sound of the tide echoing faintly below the harbour wall. Hastings broke the silence. Poor woman. She must have lived half her life haunted by that moment. Poirot nodded. Oui. She was bound not by the walls of the Abbey, but by her own conscience. And yet, Hastings, I wonder, had she truly intended to confess before I arrived? Or did my presence force the past into light once more? Hastings glanced at him. You mean you feel responsible? Poirot smiled sadly. Ah, no. Responsibility, perhaps, but not guilt. Truth, Hastings, is both a burden and a release. She chose the former. I can only hope she found the latter. They stopped near the edge of the dock. The tide was high, the water black and glimmering beneath the gaslights. A ship's bell rang somewhere in the distance. Poirot reached into his coat pocket and drew out the folded page he had kept from the nun's diary, the one with the line about the sea remembering all things. He looked at it for a long moment, then released it gently into the wind. The paper fluttered like a white bird before settling on the dark water and vanishing. Adieu, madame, he murmured. The wind stirred his coat, and the smell of the sea rose strong and clean. Hastings said softly, Well, Poirot, I suppose that's the end of it now. Poirot turned toward him, eyes thoughtful, almost weary. Perhaps, mon ami. But there is always one thing that never ends. What's that? Poirot looked back toward the sea, his voice almost a whisper. The remembrance of the dead. It is the only tide that never recedes. They stood together in silence, as the bells tolled once more across the harbour. Not mournful, but strangely peaceful, like a requiem fading into the mist. The case of murder at Moonrise Abbey was closed at last. Yet even years later, whenever Hastings recalled the sound of waves breaking against the cliffs, he thought of that woman, her face pale in the candlelight, her voice trembling with guilt, and of Poirot's final words on the Cardiff quay. The sea, Hastings, it hides nothing. It only delays the truth. Excellent. Here is the final chapter of Murder at Moonrise Abbey, titled Chapter 8, The Final Bell. This serves as the closing act, a quiet, reflective, and emotionally resonant finale. It ties up the final threads of the case and gives us a haunting yet graceful farewell, in true Agatha Christie tradition. Length, 1 through 600 words. Chapter 8. The final bell. London greeted them with the usual murk of early winter, a grey mist that hung low over the Thames, softening the outlines of buildings and making the street lamps glow like smudged stars. Poirot, impeccably dressed as always, stepped from the cab in front of Whitehaven Mansions and paused, gazing briefly at the faint drizzle that glimmered on the cobblestones. Ah, he said softly, back to civilization, Hastings. And to central heating. Hastings laughed as he paid the driver. You sound almost relieved, Poirot. I thought you rather liked your abbeys and mysteries. Poirot tilted his head. In moderation, mon ami. Even the finest wine, if taken too often, loses its flavour. One must return to order, to the comforts of reason. They climbed the stairs to Poirot's flat, where the familiar scent of furniture polish and fine cigars greeted them. Everything was as they had left it, the mantel gleaming, the silver-framed photographs precisely aligned, the fire already laid in the grate by the ever-efficient George. Within moments, Poirot had removed his hat, brushed a speck of imaginary dust from his sleeve, and settled into his favourite armchair. Hastings, meanwhile, stretched gratefully by the fire. For a while neither spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked evenly, and outside the rain whispered against the glass. At length Hastings said quietly, It's strange to be back. Feels almost unreal, as if Moonrise Abbey were a dream. Poirot nodded. Her dream, yes, but one that leaves behind a shadow upon the waking mind. He leaned forward, fingertips pressed together. Oh, see, Hastings, that place. It was not merely a school or a convent. It was a monument to guilt. Each stone, each corridor, each whispering passage, all built upon a single act that could never be undone. Hastings sighed. You mean Miss Llewellyn? Poirot's eyes softened. Yes, a woman of strength, discipline, and terrible loneliness. She lived within walls of her own making, and when those walls cracked, she chose death rather than daylight. He gazed into the fire for a long moment. There is tragedy, Hastings, not only in crime but in silence. Hastings, who was not given to introspection, said quietly, "You think she could have been saved?" Poirot smiled sadly. "Perhaps. But who among us, mon ami, can truly be saved from the past?" Several days passed. Life in London resumed its familiar rhythm. Cases, correspondence, the daily newspapers with their headlines of scandal and politics. Poirot refused all new commissions for the week, claiming that his little grey cells required a period of digestion. Then, on a foggy morning, George entered the sitting-room carrying a small parcel and an envelope. "A delivery for you, sir," he said. "Brought by hand?" Poirot accepted it with a raised brow. "By hand, you say?" Curious. The handwriting on the envelope was fine, looping, the kind produced by an educated woman's pen. But it was unfamiliar. He opened it delicately. The letter inside was brief. "Monsieur Poirot, you do not know me, but I was once a pupil at Moonrise Abbey. Miss Llewellyn was my guardian when I was a child. The news of her death has reached us, and though the world may judge her harshly, I knew her as a woman of great kindness and dignity. She saved me once from despair, from ruin. Whatever else she did, I cannot forget that. I thought you might wish to have this. It was found among the chapel relics when the abbey was closed. Yours faithfully, Eleanor Price." "Price?" Hastings repeated when Poirot handed him the note. "Surely not a relation of Miss Alice Price, the murdered schoolmistress?" "Oui, Hastings. The niece, perhaps." Poirot opened the parcel. Inside lay a small brass handbell, dulled by time, its handle carved with a cross and a single word. "Pax." "Peace," Hastings murmured. Poirot held it delicately, as though it were a sacred object. This was the bell used by the nuns of Moonrise Abbey to summon prayer. When the boarding school took its place, Miss Llewellyn kept it upon her desk. "I noticed it there on our first day." He rang it once softly. The note was pure and haunting, a thin silver tone that seemed to linger far beyond its sound. "It is strange," Poirot said quietly, "how an object can hold the echo of a soul. This, Hastings, is her confession, not written but resonant." The final bell. That evening, as the rain continued to fall over London, Poirot and Hastings dined together. Fish, steamed vegetables, and a modest bottle of Bordeaux. The conversation turned again, inevitably, to the case. "I've been thinking," said Hastings, carving his portion with care. "You said once that superstition is often a mask for guilt. But in this case it almost feels like the superstition was right. The moon, the sea, the prophecy, all of it happened just as the diary foretold." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps, mon ami, but not by divine design. It was Miss Llewellyn's mind, orderly, methodical, consumed by ritual, that gave superstition its shape. She became the instrument of her own prophecy. The red moon rose not by chance, but because she willed it so. Then the prophecy fulfilled itself?" "No, Hastings," Poirot said softly. "She fulfilled it." He poured the wine carefully. "It is the tragedy of the human heart, to long for fate when we are simply facing consequence." Hastings shook his head. "Are you philosophers, Poirot? I prefer things straightforward. A murderer, a motive, a confession, that's enough for me." Poirot chuckled. "Ah, simplicity. You are blessed, mon ami. But for some of us, even when the case is closed, the mystery remains, not of the deed but of the soul." He raised his glass. "To Miss Gwenda Llewellyn and to the peace she sought, though she found it only in death." Hastings lifted his glass as well, subdued. "To peace," he echoed. The two men drank in silence, the rain whispering steadily at the windows. Later that night, after Hastings had gone, Poirot remained seated at his desk. The bell lay before him, its polished surface reflecting the flicker of the fire. He opened his casebook and wrote a single note in his neat, slanted hand. "Case closed, Moonrise Abbey. A tragedy of conscience. A soul imprisoned by devotion. May God grant her the peace she denied herself." He paused, then added beneath it, "The sea remembers but forgives nothing." He sat back, removed his spectacles, and looked once more at the little bell. For a moment he could almost hear it again, faint far away, as if rung by unseen hands across the distance of the Welsh cliffs. Poirot smiled sadly, whispered a quiet prayer in French, and closed the notebook. Outside, The bells of Westminster began to chime the hour, slow, solemn, echoing across the sleeping city. Poirot extinguished the lamp, leaving only the fire's glow upon the polished brass bell. The final chime faded and silence returned, deep, complete, and peaceful.